Thank you, everyone. Welcome. Sorry for the delay. Thank you all for joining us today to this Fireside chat as part of the Women in Tech Scale Hub program with the NSRCL IIM Bangalore team. As everyone is joining in the chat box, quickly, I would just like to know where are you all joining in from? So just type in the city that you're joining in from in the chat box. So Shubhra says Bangalore, Mansi, Bangalore, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Bangalore. I'm personally joining from Sydney along with my co-founder Anu, and our guest today is also joining in from Bangalore. So welcome everyone. And for those of you who haven't met me yet, hi, my name is Anisha Gopal, and I'm a mindset and results coach with over 5 years of coaching experience and over 18 years in IT and tech industry. I'm also a co-founder at Skwill, where our mission is to help founders like yourself to build not just great products, but also sales systems and the confidence to scale them. Which is why, as a woman tech founder myself, I'm really, really excited about today's conversation because we are going to dive into some of the most pressing questions that founders like ourselves have, which is how do I scale? How do I fundraise? What does it actually take to grow internationally? And to help us all unpack that today, we are joined by someone who's not just been there, but built a playbook. So please welcome Rostow Ravanan, co-founder at Mindtree, one of the India's first venture-backed tech startups in 1999. And under his leadership, Mindtree has seen a lot of milestones, including the IPO in 2007, international expansion, and strategic acquisitions. And in 2021, Rostow co-founded Alpha Hive, an AI-driven cybersecurity startup, and he continues to lead, advise startups as founder, investor, and board member through his association at Mila Ventures and Carlyle Group. So Rostow, welcome to the Fireside Chat, and we are so excited to have you today.
Thank you, Anisha. The only minor addition I wanted to sort of mention is that all the successes at Mindtree had lots and lots of effort by lots and lots of people, including Anup here. So I can only claim maybe 0.01% of the credit for all the success at Mindtree. There were more than 20,000 people when I left the company, and everybody played their part. It was just an organization that encouraged all of us to do our best. So I can't claim too much of the credit for Mindtree, but otherwise, very happy to be here. Women in tech has been a subject that's been very close to my heart. Sort of the wake-up call for me was that in 1999, just after Mindtree started, I had gone to one of India's premier engineering colleges for recruitment. And as a tech company, or all the recruitment that we used to do were from the what India calls the circuit branches: electrical, electronics, computer science, telecom, etc. And believe it or not, in 1999, out of the graduating class in that particular institution was probably about, say, 400 people in these branches, and the number of women in that was like like you can count on like two fingers, count on on the fingers of both your hands there. And we realized that this is a problem. And over the years, many of us have done a lot of things to now when I go to some of the colleges, obviously I don't recruit from campuses in large numbers anymore, but now when I go to campuses, not just the leading institutes in India like the IITs or IIScs, but even in tier 2, tier 3 campuses, upwards of 50% of the graduating class is women, including a reasonably large portion of women, even in the traditional branches like civil engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, etc., which historically haven't been very friendly for women candidates. So if at all there's something that I feel proud about of contributions to the industry, this is probably the one thing I would be very, very happy about.
Absolutely. And let's hope the same trend continues even in the entrepreneurship field as well, where we see more and more women participating. All right. So before we begin, Rostow, something I'm curious about, and I'm sure even you are. We would like to get a pulse of our audience today. So in the chat box, just with 1 or 2 words, where are you in your startup journey? Are you still in the MVP phase, seed, raising funds, scale up? Just in the chat box so that we know the audience today and make sure that we are meeting you where you are at. Okay, just launch the MVP early revenue.
One request I have, as all of you are filling it up, if more of you could turn your video on, assuming you're in a place and you have good connectivity, etc. There, it feels a little bit disconcerting to talk to a blank screen. I know Anup's face really well, and Anisha and I have chatted once or twice in the past, but more curious to see all of you.
All right, so looks like a lot of them are in early revenue MVP, and great. All right, thank you everyone for being so engaging on the chat. Now, Rostow, before we jump into scale strategy and everything startup, I wanted to ask you a few questions to know the human behind the title. So your first question is, over the journey, what is that one thing that hasn't changed about Rostow as a person since your early founder days at Mindtree?
Okay. In my case, it's always the title behind the human. So that's therefore an easy question to answer. Several years ago, in one of the conversations at Mindtree, one of my colleagues made this comment that what brought us together at Mindtree was the mission, the purpose, the ability to make a change to organizations, to people, to society, etc. But what kept us together, and a promise not to laugh, what kept us together was our love for cheap thrills and good food. So that's the one thing that has not changed for all of us over the years.
Thank you. I can see Anup laughing, so I'm guessing he can relate to the story.
So when Anup is in Bangalore, we find the most memorable list of restaurants that we've ever been to in our past lives and go back and recreate those experiences. So yes, love for cheap thrills and good food.
Thank you so much, Rostow, for that, sharing that with us. So let's rewind the clock a little bit. So you co-founded Mindtree at a time when tech startups weren't even the buzzword that they are today. So what was it that gave you and your founding team the conviction to take the leap, and what was your why?
I agree with the sort of context of this question. On a lighter vein, when Mindtree started in 1999, I was I'm unmarried. I was single at that time. And one of my aunts, when they heard this news, called my dad and said, "Oh my God, what is he doing? No father would give their girl to this guy if he goes into the startup world, etc." So that was the shape of the world from a sort of entrepreneurship perspective there. I guess the poster child at that time when the tech industry was Infosys, which by that time was not a startup in 1999. Infosys was already $100+ million company, but you're right, there weren't that many overall. But the why for me was, I would say, two things. The person who was sort of the anchor, linchpin, etc., whatever you want to call it for Mindtree, was my colleague Shubroto Bakshi. Anup and I have done a lot of work with him, just an unbelievably inspirational character. So the fact that Shubroto was the one who originally came up with the idea of doing something, we were in Hyderabad on a work trip for our previous employer. So Shubroto said, "I want to start something. Would you like to join?" I said yes within a microsecond, simply because you wanted to be part of that group. You wanted to be part of that team. You wanted to be part of whatever Shubhata was putting together. So the people behind the organization was, I would say, the biggest driver. The second driver was that giving back to society is something that I deeply believe in. So the why for me was the second sentence that Shubhata said, that Mindtree would be an organization with a social conscience. So from the beginning, Mindtree had set out a portion of its profitability to support social causes. Over the years, it got refined further and further. So during the time when I was at Mindtree, our focus was education, but more specifically, education for differently able children. Because the world is very large, there are many problems. You obviously, one organization can't impact at scale on any of those kind of large problems. So you have to focus on something. So it's the social consciousness and the team that was behind Mindtree that made me say yes. All the rest, the business, the strategy, all the ups and downs all came later. But it was the team and the social purpose that was the why for me.
Yeah. And I think it's the why that most often than not actually gives you the resilience to keep going as well when it comes to entrepreneurship.
True.
So my second question was going to be, Mindtree, though you guys started small, it wasn't just local and it went global pretty early, which isn't easy. And you also led the operations in Europe, which is no small feat. So I know that most of our founders here on this chat, on this session, want to know what is it that it takes to become globally successful. Like, how do they go to market? And if you can share from your experience, what are some of those strategies, what are some of those questions that you asked yourself, or the early bets that help you go global?
Maybe I'll take you on a slight tangent, Anisha, before I answer the question more specifically. I think the first thing for this audience to reflect upon is that it is not as necessary today for ventures to go global as it was in the 1990s when I was part of the team that started Mindtree there. There are lots of businesses that are extremely successful, only focusing on India as a market, or Middle East or Asia or Australia. You could have a smaller market footprint and still be extremely successful. Just to take an example, Airtel is like, I think I remember 20 or whatever $billion in revenue, and their largest footprint is in India. They did acquisitions overseas relatively late in their life. I think after they became 5 billion or 10 billion or whatever of revenue there. And like that, there are many, many organizations that have made very large, very successes, even focusing on limited number of markets. So my first comment would be that people have to think about what is the best market for the product or service that they have, and then focus on it. So being in 20 countries or being in 2 countries is less of the issue, but where will your market be most relevant for what audiences, for what enterprises or whatever. So just evaluate what markets makes the most sense for you and focus on that. So there's no glamour in a sense of being in larger footprints than otherwise. But assuming it does make sense for your business to go global, the main advantages also have to be clear. For example, I am an early stage startup right now, like you mentioned, Alpha Hive. We are also very small, early revenue, like many of you have mentioned. Our ARR is less than 500K at the moment, so still have a very long way to go. But for us, the necessity to go global was for our offering. India is a very poor paymaster, so it's almost 1:3. If I can sell the same solution for a similar size company in the US for say $100,000, India will not give me more than $30,000 of revenue, subscription revenue per annum. So for our case, the market in India is probably also valid, but the prices don't make sense in India. So we went overseas, we went global, we went to Europe and US for a commercial reason. So that also has to be clear as to why you want to go global there. Assuming some analysis has happened and you do want to go global, my sort of experience has been that it has to be at this stage of most people's life, it has to be very client-led. Do you have somebody in your network, maybe your college senior or maybe somebody else that you worked with in the past, somebody who you know has to trust you to give you your first entry. To go cold calling to an overseas market where this company is small, the product is unheard of, so there is no referenceability, there is no brand value, there is no other way to convincing somebody to build a business, somebody to not trust you and give you business there. So the first hook has to be places that you already have some amount of personal connections or something to bridge the trust. So ride those coattails to go first, and then you do all the other classic things. Once you build some kind of a footprint, then references, then cold calling, then all the classic sales process, etc., kick in at that stage there. But at the end of the day, there is no easy answer to this. It is customer by customer, employee by employee, brick by brick. That's the only way to build the business there, which is also reflected in the fact that if 100 startups are, get incorporated, maybe more than 90, don't make it. Only the 10 that make it. It's because it's a long, hard, tough journey. journey, and there are no shortcuts to this. The first, like I said, they're coming back. The first few customers have to come based on some personal relationships or contacts or some network that you already have. Because otherwise, to convince somebody else to trust you and give you business would be very, very difficult, especially when they're far away from your home. So if you want to go international, sitting in whatever Bangalore, and you want to sell to somebody in the US is difficult. But once you cross the first 1 or 2 or 5 or whatever customers, then all the other classic stuff, including today, for example, digital and social media play a really huge role. There are curated marketplaces. Let's say, for example, for enterprise software, there is G2. So you have to obviously qualify and get your entry into it, and they have to give a reference for you and so on and so forth there. But the enterprise buyers, for example, come to these marketplaces. Yeah, it's almost like a TripAdvisor for enterprise software. So once you go past the initial hump and you have some momentum, then participating in the right events like NRF if you're a retail focused company in New York, and similarly, for example, for cybersecurity, there is RSA in California, and so on and so forth. Participating in the right events, getting yourself listed on the right platforms, using social media like LinkedIn in a very scientific, very precise, very surgical way. So these are the things that you can do to grow your presence after you established your foothold.
Got it. And for those listening and thinking like, should I even go global right now? And I think you've addressed part of the question. How do you recommend they figure out when is that right time to scale internationally?
So I guess we covered a little bit of it in the past, but I'll just go back. The benefit of going global is that then you're dealing with the most sophisticated customers in whatever segment that you're dealing with. And I must give a disclaimer: all my life has been enterprise-focused kind of tech businesses. So I have zero experience in B2C, and therefore, if any of you are specifically looking for B2C kind of context, then I probably am the wrong person to give you any guidance on it. I just haven't had any experience in it at all. But for those of you who are more B2B kind of players, I think the best benefit of going global is that you deal with the most sophisticated customers in that area. If you're providing engineering services, for example, almost all the leading aerospace, automotive, all of those companies are all global. They're not that much in India for those worlds. If you look at, for example, banking, India may probably have more sophisticated buyers than a Western market there. But the bottom line is, by going international, you get to work with the most sophisticated customers, and you also go up against the most sophisticated competitors. And therefore, you just learn a lot. You just become stronger as an organization. Your product, your value proposition, your sales motion all become stronger because you're tested against very high standards. So that's the benefit of going global. Otherwise, you could end up being a frog in a very small well, and you start thinking very highly of yourself. Reality sets in when you go after the big boys, and some you will win, some you will lose into statistical probability, but you'll get a reality check of where you stand on international scale, international expectations, international quality by the time you go global there. But the other reason is that you all, like I mentioned in my own example before, typically Western markets tend to pay better for technology in terms of price points compared to local markets. Most of Asia, Southeast Asia, India, China, Malaysia, Singapore, etc., tend to be extremely price-sensitive markets. So for the same unit of effort, you'll end up realizing a smaller amount of value for yourself than if you go to the Western markets. It's just simply the nature of buyers, nature of technology, nature of markets, etc. there. And then you also have peculiarities. For example, the US is a very professional-driven buying market. You have to be in the right place. You have to have a good product, good solution, technology, commercials, etc., etc. So all the sort of quantitative, technical aspects fall into place. It's easy to convince an American buyer to buy. Versus, as an example, the Middle East market is a very relationship-oriented market. So the first 8 meetings with a prospect, you'll just end up having to have coffee with that person, and the person just want to get to know you, decide whether to believe you, decide whether to trust you, etc. The 9th meeting, you say, maybe next year I'll issue an RFP. Then the 10th meeting, you'll get the RFP. 11th meeting, you'll compete for that RFP, and so on and so forth there. But the per contra, the thing is, Middle East is a less competitive market. Everybody somebody and their brother-in-law is already in the US. The Middle East is not as competitive. So all markets come with their own trade-offs and pros and cons there. So while going global, the decision of where to go, also the bottom line why I gave you all the story was that research the target markets for you really well. Once you build the product, once you have a sense of who the customers are, once you have a sense of what the quote unquote ICP for you would be, then do some research. There's enough information available, published information available. There's experiences that networks like this can give you, and so on and so forth. Do your research and prioritize. Because where I was going with that long preamble was that a new market entry is very expensive. And to use my past experience of Mindtree, an entry into a new market will at least be $2 million because you have to hire, set up an office, do some branding, and so on and so forth. Now, today's day and age, with all the tools, like I said, social media, etc., available, maybe the bar has dropped a little bit. Maybe 250K is okay to start with. 500K would be a nice number to have if you want to plan an entry into a new market. So it comes with a cost. And which is why, therefore, the more you front load research, knowledge, understanding, segmentation, etc., then you can spend that money wisely. Otherwise, it's very, very easy to blow money on marketing. And then you'll realize that if it didn't give you enough results, then you'll kick yourself, which I don't want you to do. So that's why I plan. Like Einstein made this famous comment, if I have 1 hour to cut a tree, I'll spend 59 minutes sharpening the axe. So the more time you invest in planning will give you much more results when the rubber hits the road.
Thank you so much for those insights, Rostow. And just for everyone, when Rostow mentioned those numbers around 250K, he's referring to US dollars and not INRs, just to make it clear. All right.
One of the downsides of being in a global business, the dollar is the only currency that we all recognize. And the US dollar, not even the AUD or the SGD or any other dollars. Life automatically converts everything, every number into USD.
True, absolutely true. And it's very easy to underestimate all these cultural, compliance, regulatory requirements when you're dreaming big. So thanks for, bringing us all to ground and giving us a framework to approach, growing internationally. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit to something that's top of mind for every founder, and that is fundraising. Now, you were, as we discussed earlier, one of the very few Indian startups that raised venture back in the early 2000s. And then Mindtree with IPO, and now we are so closely related in the entrepreneur ecosystem. What, in your view, still holds true today when it comes to engaging investors?
Okay. So one unfortunate, and I use the word very carefully here, I'll explain what I meant by unfortunate, but one unfortunate reality is that funding markets are very fickle and change on a dime. There will be periods in a year like 2021, 2022, there was just so much money chasing ideas that you had people with the most ridiculous ideas, no way of making money, all were able to raise like tens of millions of dollars of money at like hundreds of millions of dollars of valuation there, compared to say late 23, 24, and even today, it's technically what the newspapers call as the funding winter. Even the most well-tested ideas by most solid teams still find it an uphill battle to raise money there. And even if you're lucky and somebody is willing to put a term sheet on the table, valuations are a lot more sober today, and compared to sort of the frothy era that you saw not just 2-3 years ago there. So there is one fundamental factor, which is like gravity. I mean, you can't beat it. So you have to recognize that timing is a variable in this equation. So when you go approach markets for funding is an important variable. Again, like I said, outside your control, but it's important to recognize it exists and plan for it accordingly. Beyond that, I think what is in your control, which is always the case before and now, and will be the case in the future as well, is the fundamentals of the business. And the fundamentals of the business, I would say, are a two-sided coin. One side of the coin is the idea. What is the idea? Is it new? Is it innovative? Is it disrupting something? Is it what the sort of SaaS industry calls a category creator or a category replacer? Who are you sort of selling to? And so on and so forth there. All of which the investor wants to understand to see if this were to be successful, how big can it be? In say 10 years, can this be $100 million business or whatever metric that they all use there? So they want to understand the product, the problem, the solution, who you're going to sell it to, price points for it. Is it easy to scale? For example, a SaaS business is easy to scale if you hit your stride, because adding one more tenant to your SaaS environment is like practically very, very sort of negligible kind of cost and effort, right? Whereas a consulting or a manpower-oriented business, scale means every additional dollar to recruit one more person, that person has to be trained, deployed at a customer, etc. So they'll want to understand all about the product, the market, ability to scale, and so on and so forth. And that forms a very large part of the fundamentals. The second is the team. Who's the team? Is it a one person or is it a group of people? Amongst them, do they have a sense of all the aspects of building and scaling a business? Is there somebody who knows technology, somebody who knows sales, somebody who knows HR, somebody who knows finance, etc., etc.? Titles, I think, probably are less important. So everybody a co-founder, only one co-founder, all that I think to some extent is less important. But does the group present themselves as an effectively functioning team that brings all the pieces of an enterprise technology or whatever product that you're building in business there? So those are the two variables that drive the question on the fundamentals. Assuming both of them get high scores, my experience is that you will get funding. It just requires maybe either you can close it quickly or take a little bit of time. And you also have to recognize that this is unfortunately one of those things where you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you discover your prince. So you have to meet like lots of investors till you find the organization that is willing to back you and you feel comfortable with as well. So there could be lots of people who may be willing to fund you, but they come with expectations, they come with conditions, etc., that may not make sense for you there. And again, to go back to our example, when all of us were at Mindtree, it was a stated, what shall I say, a point in our business plan that we will give away a portion of our profits for social causes. And a lot of investors don't like it. A lot of investors said, no, we want you to make money, and whatever money you make, we have to get our share at it there. The fact that they will not get 100% of our profits obviously put some people off. So like that, you will have your own peculiarities, your own value systems, your own sort of growth plans, your own sort of strategy, etc., etc. So every investor you meet may or may not align with all of those things, which is why, like I said, you have to kiss a lot of frogs, and then finally you'll find your prince, and then thereafter sign up the deal and get the money from that organization there. On the whole, I think it's a much better environment today because, for example, failures are no longer a badge of dishonor. So you started something and it didn't work. No other entrepreneur, no other VC will say, "Oh my God, this fellow started and sold something or failed at it, etc." Willingness to look at failure, etc., has changed a lot. Secondly, there's much bigger pools of capital. Again, for example, depending on where people are in their journey, there was no angel network to talk about even 10 years back or 15 years back. Today, for example, there are multiple thriving angel networks, starting from India Angels, which is the oldest, to Bangalore Angels, Chennai Angels, etc. You also have crowdfunding platforms like OneCrowd. So the overall amount of money, the types of investors, lots of people have made money and therefore are willing to take some bets on startups and so on and so forth. So the quantum of investors and therefore the quantum of money is significantly higher today. And therefore you can therefore it's relatively a lot easier to raise money. Finally, if you meet the conditions and you've not yet tried it, there are platforms like NASCOM. For example, I am very actively involved with NASCOM's Deep Tech Club, and one of the things that the Deep Tech Club at NASCOM does is to create like a quote unquote like a speed dating kind of a format. There'll be a given day, given time. You book a banquet hall in a large hotel, and all the investors will be on a table, and startups just rotate from table to table to table to go submit their pictures in like 10-15 minutes. And if you match each other's expectations, then you go offline and do a longer session and follow on meetings and so on and so forth there. Something like that, for example, never existed in the past. So overall, it's a lot more safer, kinder, more sensible environment today compared to the past for raising money.
Great. That was a lot of value packed in just those last 5 minutes. So my question to you is, as an investor, what is it that about a founder that makes you stand out? A founder or the company that's being pitched?
So at this stage, Anisha, truly it's all about the founders, right? The company probably will be just like a few weeks or few months or whatever old. It'll probably have all the basic requirements, registered office and a GST number and all the kind of stuff. There'll be nothing else in the company per se other than the team. And I guess within the team also the leaders play a disproportionate part in it there. So the things I look for, I would say are probably the top two for me is, are they the most, what shall I say, knowledgeable, committed, etc., expert in that area? For example, a few days ago, we had a pitch from somebody who was coming up with a different way of building batteries. So because batteries have become essential, starting from digital devices to electric vehicles and so on and so forth, right? So this person has come up with a completely different chemistry that goes into a battery that allows you to charge faster, make the battery last longer, and so on and so forth. There. But the person came across as a very deep expert in chemistry, in material sciences, etc. This thing. So therefore, I mean, just using that as a placeholder for an example, is this person who's pitching to me the most comes across as the most knowledgeable expert in that area? So that's because ultimately you're taking a bet on the idea, and the only reference you can draw is, does the person know what they are talking about? So expertise of the person in whatever field that they are working on is one. Secondly, I would test for resilience, because the journey of an entrepreneur is one of high highs and low lows. There are days when everything will go well. You will land an order, you hire the best employee that you can think of, you'll get a new office at the cheapest rate, and so on and so forth. There'll be days when everything goes wrong. Your largest customer will yank their chain away from you. Your best employee will want to quit, and so on and so forth. There, to last the distance requires mental grit, to have that conviction, to fight against all the odds when everything looks really, really bleak, is one of the things that I look for there. Because believe me, when I tell you this, for at least 5, at the very least, years, it's just a question of a lot of trouble, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of hard work, a lot of anxiety, a lot of dealing with the unknown, etc., before you can even put your head above water and take like a peaceful breath. So for 5 years, it'll at least, most likely it'll be longer, but at least for 5 years, this journey will require an enormous amount of trials and tribulations. So will this person last through all of those, is the first thing that I look for from a team perspective. Secondly, will the team work well with each other? If you look at many of the examples that we have seen in our industry, whether they have succeeded, which was an example like, say, Mindtree, or many others, the teams break down and that leads the business to break down. So are there a group of people that are held together by shared values? Then whatever, it doesn't have to be buddies, it doesn't have to be your whatever college classmate and so on and so forth. But are these a team that are, like I said, held together by something that commits them to this cause, and therefore will they hold together during ups and downs there? So on the team and the leaders, this is what I would look for. But I want people to also understand that life is not about just one or two things. It's always easy when you're asking questions, say, what's the one thing or what's the 3 things, etc. Life doesn't work that way. The reality is there'll be many more, including, market traction, customers, growth, prospects, pipeline, and so on and so forth there. So finally, to get a positive answer in your favor from an investor, you have to be prepared for at least weeks of, detailed discussions, analysis, data to be shared, etc., etc. But in the interest of answering this question, the spirit that you asked, Anisha, I stuck to top 2, but I don't want to leave a wrong impression that you get these 2 right and it increases your probability. These are the highest weightage, but there'll probably be at least 15 or 20 things that you have to convince a customer. Because at the end of the day, remember this, that person who's giving you money, it's either their own hard-earned money. I mean, for example, you go make a pitch to, just making a random example right now. Chris Gopalakrishnan is a very active investor. So you get a chance to go meet Chris, Chris Gopalakrishnan, for those of you who don't know, is one of the co-founders of Infosys. Obviously has a lot of money and does a lot of investments plus social causes, etc. But every rupee that Chris invests came out of a lot of hard work, right? So either an individual investor like Chris who's investing his hard-earned money, or a venture capital fund that has gone and raised money from other people, from banks and institutions and universities, etc., etc. So they are all super careful about where they commit that money. So therefore, remember that whoever is giving you money, it's money that's come by to them very difficult process, and therefore they'll be that much more careful before they decide that they like you and give you the money. So they got nothing against you. So they whatever, ask you tough questions, they put like difficult conditions, etc., etc. Don't take it personally, not because they don't like you or they like your face or anything of that sort. It's just that that's just the way of the world there. But there's also a merit to it, because if capital becomes easily available, then every idea gets funded and a lot of money gets wasted. So one of the what shall I say, expectations of smart capital is to ensure that only the smart ideas get funding, and the others either get forced to re-examine, re-evaluate, pivot, and come back in a different way. All those ideas die because not every person who has an idea, can build it into a big business. So that's the nature of capital, to be spermicidal.
Nice. And the more and more I'm realizing is stock markets are emotional, selling is emotional, and seems like even investing is emotional.
Yeah, so in all of them, whether to stock markets or investing, and I'll differentiate selling to a certain extent in this case there, the foundation is a little bit, I would say, more weighted towards data. The company, like whatever, if you decide to buy, again, just to continue my previous example, if you are an investor and you want to buy Infosys, you will look at all the data. What is their growth? What is their experience in this, that, whatever, all the fields that a stock market investor would look at. And then you'll top it up with emotion, saying that, what do you think of it? What do you think of the management, and so on and so forth there. Similarly with the venture investors as well. The base would always be data, but the final wrapper before a decision comes out to you is a certain amount of emotional, subjective kind of aspects as well there. So both need to go hand in hand, and both have their own weightages. But selling to some extent is slightly different in the sense that it's probably more weighted towards emotion. Because there are these examples of where people have gone and sold ice to an Eskimo, or carried coal to Newcastle, and all those things that you've heard of, idioms you've heard of, right? It's because there are genuinely very charismatic salespeople like Anup Jha sitting here who've gone and sold stories to customers that they would have never even bought otherwise. So I would say selling your product or service has a higher weightage, emotional, than quantitative. But for most other things, both have to go hand in hand. You can't win by maxing out on one and being like, it's not 100-0 on either. The right weightage of both have to be there for investing, either as a stock market investor or as a venture investor.
Understood. Thank you so much, Rostow, for sharing that. Just in the interest of time, if anyone has any questions, sorry,
since the investing aspect was front of mind for many people, one lesson that I learned, which probably to some extent could be useful to you, today there are a fair number of focused incubators that have come in. For example, in my new venture, which is cybersecurity, I was selected by this incubator in Philadelphia called Dreamit. So headquartered in Philadelphia, but they operate globally. A lot of them would also give you safe spaces in which you can come and try out your pitches. Like in Dreamit, in my own example, they have a lot of ex-CISOs, investors, etc., who will not say yes or no to you at the end of your pitch, but give you a lot of feedback. What did you say correctly? What did you not say correctly? What had conviction? And so on and so forth there. So you get like a safe space to rehearse if you find the right audience. Like typically, many good incubators exist in India, overseas, etc. So depending on the focus segment that you are focused on, go get empaneled in some of these incubators and use that as a way to make sure that your pitch is coming across as as coherent and as sharply as you can put it together. So that is one tip that I can leave you with.
Thank you so much, Rostow, for sharing all of that. I know we've just got one more minute to go. I'm going to ask you one last question, and that is, if you were mentoring your younger self, founder self, say, 1 year into Mindtree, what advice would you give him?
I just saw Ananya's question. So this one is called Dream It. DREAMIT. So, like I said, they are the ones based in Philadelphia. The guy who runs the cybersecurity piece of it is called Mel Shakir, MELSHAKIR. You can find him on LinkedIn and send him a note if you have a cybersecurity story, and just tell him that I referred you. He'll at least hear you out, and then wherever it goes beyond that. Ananya, to your question there. So the one, I would say this is obviously a very personal question. So therefore, for me personally, Anisha, the answer I would give myself is that don't sell too early. Classic middle class mentality in my case, and obviously this is my example. Mindtree started, went IPO, became reasonably successful, etc. But I had a home mortgage, and this again, like I said, very classic middle class mentality of not wanting to have a loan over my head. I sold a portion of my holdings in Mindtree very early to get out of that loan there. And if I hadn't done it, I could have probably had like a few zeros more to my net worth today than otherwise there. So knowing when to sell, I think is an important lesson that I have learned, and I give back to myself if I went back there. But the second lesson, just to sneak in another point there, my own experience has been that many things that have happened in my life made no sense to me in the moment. But looking back on it 25 years later, I saw how all those pieces connected. For example, I started in a business role in Mindtree. Had like medium success. I wouldn't call myself a great success there. But out of the blue, the then CFO of Mindtree left very early in the history of Mindtree. I put my hand up and took over the CFO role. I have no idea why I did it, and context obviously was very different at that time. I had no idea of the importance of it at that time when I took over that role in 2004. But in 2015, when I got a chance to get back to the business, the board told me that one of the reasons they gave me that chance was that other than the CEO, the CFO is the only person who has an entire view of the business. Nobody else, otherwise everybody just focused on their own groups, right? If you're heading this geography or this vertical, you know everything about that piece of your business, but you don't have a sense of the business as a whole there. So the fact that I got the chance to play a CFO for 10 years never made sense in the moment, but made so much sense when I look back upon it much later in life there. So when you come across these inflection points, decision points, whatever you can, and this is the punchline, which is why I gave you that long story. Well, the lesson in my life, and if you can see me, is a diagram that one of my colleagues had on their TAC board. This is your comfort zone, and this is where all the exciting things are happening. So unless you go out of your comfort zone and want to do something that's exciting things will not happen to you. So when you get these most difficult, most butterflies in your stomach kind of the moment, know that in retrospect, when you look back upon that moment 20, 15 years later in your life, taking that butterfly in the stomach moment is probably the right thing for you to do.
Got it. There was one question that I missed out, Rostow, and that was most of our audience today here are women founders. And we know that from data, women-led startups, they receive proportionately, they form a small share of the funding, right? So from your perspective, what do you make of this gap? And more importantly, is there any advice you can give the women founders on how they can reframe or position their value in a way that resonates? And if there is any potential subconscious bias, they are able to overcome that.
So 3-4 reactions to that question, Anisha. Firstly, if you have an idea that you have a high amount of conviction with, at least the group that I am part of, Mera Ventures, early stage VC fund, and if your idea is a enterprise technology kind of a solution, send it across to me. There are a few of us who have a little bit more of a positive bias for women founders. So I think maybe more of the 12 investment that you have made, the fact that as a woman-led founder was a critical piece of the sort of investment thesis there. So there are a few of us who actually seek out and look for women founder ideas there, simply because, like I said, there's a deep conviction behind it. The second is that there's a reasonable number of investors today compared to even 3 years or 5 years back who are gender neutral. So they don't have no interest in knowing what gender you are. They only look at your idea, your team, and all the business aspects of the idea there. So there's enough money that you can chase who are, what shall I say, less biased, and therefore go after those kind of cases. And I'm sure, like I said, incubators like DreamMate, platforms like NASCOM, investors like Mela, all of us will be able to support you and be very, very happy to do it there. There are these idiots, like in any group of 100 people, there'll be 10 very nice people, there'll be 10 idiots, and the remaining 80 will be somewhere in between. It's just a natural way of any bell curve of distribution. So ignore those 10 idiots and don't even waste time with them. If they today's day and age they think gender is a question that they have to consider, etc. The world is much larger for you to waste your time with idiots there. But I would also add a disclaimer to it. A lot of women founders that I come across, and this is my honest assessment, and I don't mean to offend anybody, somehow always either feel, what shall I say, apologetic or feel very diffident because of your gender. I think the pitch should also have nothing to do with your gender. Say, this is who I am, this is my background, this is what I've done, this is what gave me the idea that a business like this will succeed, this is the technology behind it, and all the sort of practical aspects of your pitch there. Don't assume that the other person has a bias toward gender. A lot of women that I come across also have something that sort of holds them back. And this is, again, like I said, not just personal experience. Literature also shows that, for example, in the HR world, there's literature that shows that if a male and a female candidate are considered in an organization for a promotion, the woman may be 70% ready for that new role. But will hesitate to put her hand up because she is overemphasizing the 30% that she does not know and does not focus on the 70% that she knows, versus all other things being equal. If the man was 50% ready and 50% not ready, would ignore the 50% which is not ready, overemphasize the 50% where he's ready, and be very happy to take that risk and position themselves in a very positive light for that interview, discussion, etc., etc. Again, like I said, there is I don't know what to call it, but I'll just use a loose term here called diffidence. Give up your diffidence. Proceed with full confidence, full conviction that you are here to rule the world there. Because even if the pitch you are giving to is an idiot, that idiot is still a smaller proportion of the overall world. I mean, you have to fight much bigger, much larger, much more complex battles in the real world with prospective customers and with, and issues that you're going to face with talent and everything else there. So, so don't worry about this one investor that you're pitching to, who may or may not have a bias towards gender and therefore may or may not be positive to your proposal there. At the end of the day, like I said, the journey of an entrepreneur is just, like I said, at least 5 years, if not more, of battling adversity before you can even get the beginning glimpses of, like I said, holding your head above water and taking a peaceful breath. So you'll have to struggle underwater for at least 5 years. So since it's a long haul, any lesson that you learn, treat it like physical fitness, right? Like the best time to build muscle is when you do adversity training. Just lifting your hand up and down like this is not going to build your biceps, but carrying a 10 kg weight and doing this will build your biceps, right? So treat any adversity that comes to you as an example, as a way by which you can build muscle. And an idiotic investor is just one of those people that you'll come across.
Thank you, Rostow. That is so encouraging and refreshing to hear. And I do agree, being a mindset coach, a lot of the times it's our own self-bias and limiting beliefs that stops us from putting our best foot forward. So thank you for sharing that. For all those who are interested, there's a resource that Anup has posted the link to around what are some of the biases, investor biases, specifically around female entrepreneurs. So click on that, download it, have a good read. I'm going to squeeze in one last question, Rostow. And this is
I have time, so
more
I'm
for
enjoying myself.
Skwill as well, and something that we battle with day in, day out. So you've talked about there's a thin line between persistence and pig-headedness. And I would really like to know, how do you know as a founder when it's the right time to actually pivot your business versus when is it time to actually keep pushing through?
For the rest of you, Anisha picked up this comment from a blog that I wrote on LinkedIn a little while ago. So this is a lesson that I learned in my own life from a quote that shaped the early part of my life. It said that if at first you don't succeed, try again, then give up, because there's no use being a damn fool about it. So that's the literal quote that I heard there, which is where I draw this inference that there's a line that separates perseverance and pig-headedness. If you give up before that line, you are being silly, because no success comes easily to you. Whoever has succeeded. And if you go back today, the world's richest man is Elon Musk. There was a time when he met Tesla's corporate expenses on his personal credit card. And today, obviously, he's grown from that point to being the world's richest man, irrespective of his personality and everything else aside for a second. Even Elon Musk, who is the biggest success you can think of today, financially at least, has had tough times before they became successful. So if you give up too early, then you'll obviously make a mistake, because you have not yet reached that point where your business can take off there. But if you reach that point and you continue, then you're going because, like I said, your pig-headedness, maybe because of your ego, maybe because of something that's sort of holding you back, etc., etc. Anisha, truly the honest answer to that question is it has to make sense to you, because there's nobody else who's going to ask that question, and you're not accountable to anybody else as well, right? So the only thing you can that can guide you is all the other experiences of what you have done from the beginning of your journey till that point in time has to inform you, because I would say this is one of those decisions which is, I would say, maybe 31/3 data-based and 2/3 gut feel based. The 1/3 data is obviously, for example, to use my own life, we built a product for cybersecurity and we tried for 3 years or so, and we realized now we have to pivot, because the feedback to us from our customers is that you have a good solution to a good problem, but it's not the most urgent problem for me to solve. So therefore, our own sales is struggling right now. And we are far behind the traction that we had there. So up to a certain point, when you had the first customer, third customer, 10th customer, 15th customer telling us the same thing, and now we have to acknowledge that reality of the market feedback. So about a third of it is database, but about 2/3 of it is gut feel. You also realize that, oh my God, I'm doing this, and I know this is not going to make sense. This is going to be a even bigger uphill battle today. Realizing at what point of that continuum you are in has to be an individual decision that you can that you have to come to. Use networks, mentors, other founders, etc., etc., to just bounce off your thinking, get an external validation, and so on and so forth there. But talk to real life customers and real life prospects, because the greatest lesson you can learn in life is from the market. Your customers and your prospects are the best life coach slash business coach slash everything coach that you can think of there. So if your customers and prospects are telling you that what you have built and the way it is not relevant for them, pay attention to that.
Thank you so much, Rostow. That was really insightful. And thank you for your time and sharing all your wisdom. There's so much that I'm personally taking away from this conversation, and I'm sure the audience is as well. And I know there are a lot more questions that we all want to ask you. So everyone, all the founders on this session right now, if you have more questions for Rostow or for the Skwill team, please send that through in the survey questionnaire link that will come to you shortly. And put in your questions there. We'll see if we can have another fireside chat or a Q&A session with Rostow, if we can make that happen. So do send that. So founders, thank you so much for showing up, for being so engaging and staying through the extra 15 minutes of this chat. And I hope this has given you some insight, some food for thought, and some structure as to your decision making around your business, how to grow, how to scale. So thank you for joining, and Rostow, thank you so much for your
most welcome. My wife always has this joke with me saying that I want to have the last word on everything, but it is not for that reason. But I just want to take last maybe 10 seconds to all of you. I saw Neha's question saying with sir and some question about video analytics, etc., that she had. So my only request is, I'm available for any question that you have. The only issue is I may know or I may not know the answer to your question, but if I do, I will obviously be very happy to share with you. But the one condition I have is don't call me sir. Our entire industry is all based on informality and first names and so on and so forth there. So I will only respond if you address me as Ross. Rostow. But the literal last word was that as a lifelong Star Wars fan, may the force be with you.
Oh, was that going to be your movie name as well?
Now, the movie name, you didn't ask me the question, but as I was reading your questions, Anisha, the movie name that I had in mind was Jo Jeeta Wahi Sikandar, which is the best example that best sort of correlation I can think of for life as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so just for context for the audience, one of the questions I was going to ask Rostow was if he had to sum up his entire founder journey into a movie title, what would that be? And that was Rostow's answer, Jo Jeeta Wahi Sikandar. Brilliant. I think mine is Mission Impossible at the moment.
The only thing I'm majorly disappointed with the last 2 episodes of Mission Impossible. If it was prior to that, it could have been Mission Impossible or at least Top Gun Maverick. But the last 2 episodes of Mission Impossible were very disappointing.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And thank you, Rostow. I'll reach out to you. And please do share your feedback with us so that we can make the sessions much more better for you in the future. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye.